My name is Mason Caldwell. I am 41 years old, and I manage regional operations for a distribution company in Columbus, Ohio, which basically means I spend my days anticipating problems before they happen and smoothing over disruptions before anyone else feels them. I am the steady one at work, the calm voice on conference calls when shipments get delayed or drivers call out sick, the man who absorbs pressure and turns it into solutions. At home, though, I started to feel something I could not manage or reroute. Something subtle and quiet that crept in without a dramatic argument or a single explosive moment. Just a slow and almost invisible shift between my wife, Lauren, and me. Over the course of 1 month, I reached for her 5 different times in small, ordinary ways that married people reach for each other without even thinking. One evening in the kitchen, I placed my hand on her waist while she was rinsing vegetables, a natural touch I have done 1,000 times before, and she gently stepped forward as if she needed more room at the sink even though there was plenty of space. Another time, on a Sunday afternoon when the house was quiet and the light through the bedroom curtains was soft and warm, I suggested we go upstairs for a while. Nothing dramatic, just us, and she smiled politely and said she had emails to catch up on before Monday. A few nights later in bed, I shifted closer, sliding my arm around the way I always have, and she tensed slightly before saying she was exhausted and needed to sleep because she had an early morning meeting. There were no fights, no accusations, no slammed doors, just calm explanations delivered in an even tone. She had a headache. She was tired. She felt bloated. She had a long day. She was not in the mood. Each reason on its own was reasonable, even considerate, and if it had happened once or twice, I would not have thought anything of it. But I started noticing the rhythm of it, the way every attempt ended the same way, with her turning slightly away and me staring at the ceiling listening to the hum of the fan, telling myself it was nothing. I began counting the rejections in my head, without meaning to, almost the way I count delayed trucks or inventory discrepancies at work. 5 times in 4 weeks. 5 calm refusals delivered with the same soft voice and neutral expression. It was not anger that I felt at first, not even frustration, but a growing awareness that something had shifted beneath the surface of our marriage. We still talked about groceries and schedules and upcoming family events. We still laughed at the same shows. We still shared coffee in the mornings while scrolling through our phones. But when I tried to close the physical distance between us, there was always an invisible barrier, thin but firm, like glass. I started analyzing my own behavior the way I would analyze a struggling warehouse. Was I distracted lately, bringing too much work stress home? Had I gained weight, become less attentive, less present? I replayed our recent conversations in my head, searching for a moment where I might have hurt her or missed something important. Nothing stood out. There had been no argument, no cold silence, no sign that she was angry or disappointed. Just that steady pattern of quiet withdrawal. What unsettled me most was how polite she was about it. If she had snapped at me or told me she was upset, I would have known where I stood. Instead, she treated each attempt like a small inconvenience she needed to decline respectfully. I found myself hesitating before touching her at all, measuring the angle of my arm, the timing of a kiss, calculating whether I could handle another gentle excuse. At work, I could fix delays before anyone noticed, but at home, I felt like I was watching a wall being built brick by brick in front of me, and I had no idea who had started laying the foundation. The details began stacking up slowly, quietly, the way small discrepancies accumulate in a shipping report until you realize the numbers no longer line up with the forecast. At first, it was just new clothes for work, tailored blouses in colors she had never worn before, fitted slacks that hugged her hips in a way I could not ignore, heels that clicked sharply across our hardwood floors when she left in the mornings. For 2 years, she had rotated the same comfortable outfits, saying she did not care about fashion, that no one at the office paid attention anyway. And then suddenly she cared deeply. Tags from boutiques I had never heard of appeared in the trash. Garment bags hung in the closet, like quiet decorations of change. Then there was the gym membership. For years, I had been the one trying to get her to join me on evening walks or weekend workouts, and she would wave me off with a smile and say she was fine the way she was. Now, she was up at 6 in the morning pulling on leggings and a sports bra I had never seen before, tying her hair back with focus, leaving before I even finished my first cup of coffee. She started talking about protein intake and core strength and a trainer who was helping her set goals. Her body had not dramatically changed yet, but the intent had, and that intent felt purposeful. I noticed the perfume next. It was subtle, sharper than the floral scent she had worn for years, something warmer and more deliberate. The first time I caught it, I assumed she had sprayed too much of something old. The second time, I realized it was entirely new. I searched the bathroom counter casually one evening and did not see the bottle anywhere. It was not in the usual drawer, not tucked behind her skincare products. The scent lingered on her coat when she hung it up, but I never saw her buy it, never saw the receipt, never saw the bag it came in. A coral lipstick began appearing on the rims of coffee mugs in the sink, bright and bold against the white ceramic. Lauren had always preferred muted shades, soft pinks, and neutral tones that barely registered. This new color was vibrant, almost daring. I tried to recall when she had purchased it, replaying recent shopping trips in my mind, but there was no memory attached to it, no afternoon at the mall, no package delivered to the porch. It simply existed, like an item added to inventory without a record of shipment. The phone passcode change happened on a Tuesday night. I picked up her phone to check the time while mine was charging, and the screen asked for a new code. I handed it back to her with a light comment, and she laughed, saying privacy was healthy in any relationship. Her tone was playful, but there was an edge beneath it, a boundary being drawn. After that, she began tilting the screen away slightly when she texted, angling her body just enough to block my view. She started taking calls in the hallway instead of at the kitchen table, lowering her voice when she spoke, pacing slowly near the front door. Her schedule shifted as well. She began coming home later than usual, explaining that client dinners were part of expanding her portfolio. She described restaurants in vague terms, mentioned wine lists and presentations, but the details felt rehearsed, like bullet points instead of memories. When she walked through the door, she looked energized rather than drained, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, carrying that unfamiliar perfume with her. None of it was proof. Each piece, isolated, could be explained away as growth, self-improvement, professional ambition. But I work in logistics. I spend my days distinguishing between random delays and consistent reroutes, between isolated incidents and systemic changes in route patterns. Random delays resolve themselves. Reroutes follow intention. What I was seeing at home did not feel random. It felt coordinated, subtle but steady, like a shipment quietly redirected to a different destination, while the original address remained listed on paper. One Tuesday afternoon, in the middle of reviewing a quarterly routing adjustment for our Dayton warehouse, my phone vibrated against the desk with a text from a friend of mine named Chris, who works in commercial real estate near the Short North District and occasionally sends me pictures of crowded patios or new restaurants he thinks Lauren and I might enjoy. I opened the message without thinking, expecting something harmless, and instead found myself staring at a photo that seemed to drain the air out of my office. The image was clear, taken from across the street, zoomed in just enough to remove any doubt. Lauren was sitting at a small round metal table on the patio of a bar I recognized immediately. Sunlight catching in her hair, a cocktail glass sweating in front of her. Across from her sat a man I recognized just as quickly, Ryan Mitchell, her ex from her 20s, the one whose name had surfaced in old stories years ago, the one she had described as intense and immature and firmly in the past. They were not touching in the photograph, not in any way that would have been incriminating in a courtroom, but body language has its own language, and I am trained to read patterns that do not announce themselves directly. Her knee was angled toward him, not casually but deliberately, her torso leaning slightly forward. His elbow was hooked comfortably over the back of his chair, posture relaxed in a way that suggested familiarity rather than chance. There were 2 half-melted cocktails between them, condensation running down the glasses, the ice thin enough to indicate they had been sitting there for a while. What struck me most was the way she was smiling at him. It was not the polite smile she used at networking events or the tired half-grin she gave me lately at home. It was focused, intent, and familiar, the kind of smile that exists between 2 people who share history and private context. The moment I saw that image, every small detail from the past month aligned with brutal clarity. The new clothes that hugged her frame differently. The sudden commitment to early morning workouts. The perfume I could smell but never locate. The coral lipstick staining mugs. The changed passcode. The hallway phone calls. The late client dinners described without texture. And the quiet, measured rejections each time I reached for her. It was not a collection of coincidences anymore. It was a route map with a clear destination. I did not respond to Chris immediately. I stared at the photo long enough for my screen to dim, then locked the phone and placed it face down on my desk. I finished the report I was working on, adjusted 2 shipment schedules, returned 3 emails, and maintained the same steady tone on a conference call that I always use when smoothing over problems. My heart was pounding, but my voice never cracked. Years of managing pressure had conditioned me to compartmentalize. When I drove home that evening, the sky over Columbus was a dull gray, traffic moving in slow lines along I-670. I replayed the image in my head, not as a burst of anger, but as a sequence of facts. Patio, Ryan, cocktails, that smile. I pulled into the driveway at the usual time, walked inside, and greeted Lauren as if nothing had shifted. She was in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, still in her work clothes, coral lipstick faint but visible. I washed my hands, took chicken breast from the refrigerator, and began cooking dinner with deliberate calm, seasoning the meat, chopping vegetables, setting the table. I moved through each step methodically, like preparing a shipment that required precision. I did not confront her immediately. I did not raise my voice. I did not reference the photo. I let the evening unfold normally, the clink of silverware, the hum of the dishwasher, the quiet television in the background. I waited, not out of indecision, but because I needed to see how she would act when she walked through our door carrying the scent of another man's afternoon. That night at the kitchen island, after the plates were mostly cleared and the dishwasher hummed in the background, I leaned my forearms against the cool quartz surface and looked at her with the same measured expression I use in meetings when I already know the answer but need to hear it stated out loud. The overhead lights cast a soft glow across her face, catching the faint coral tint still clinging to her lips. I kept my tone even and asked, "Is there someone else?" I did not lace it with accusation or anger. I said it the way a man asks about a change in schedule, direct and composed. She let out a short laugh that did not reach her eyes and shook her head as if I had suggested something absurd. She called me insecure, said work stress must be getting to me, told me I was imagining problems that did not exist. Her voice carried that same polite dismissal I had grown used to over the past month. She picked up her fork and took a small bite of food, chewing slowly, posture relaxed on the surface. I did not react to the word insecure. I did not defend myself. I asked again, slower this time, each word separated by a breath. "Is there someone else?" I watched her carefully, not just her eyes but her shoulders, her hands, the rhythm of her breathing. She rolled her eyes lightly and accused me of being dramatic, said that marriages go through phases, that I was reading too much into her being busy and focused on her career. She tried to frame it as my overreaction to normal life adjustments. Then I shifted slightly and asked, "How is Ryan?" I did not raise my voice or lean forward. I did not present evidence or make it sound like a trap. I simply placed his name into the air between us and let it sit there. Her entire face changed, not dramatically, not in a way that would register to someone who was not looking for it, but enough. Just for a second, the fork in her hand froze midair before it reached her mouth. The muscles along her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her eyes flickered to mine, and then away, recalculating. It lasted maybe half a heartbeat, but it was there, a crack in the surface she had been maintaining. She recovered quickly, setting the fork down with a soft clink and forcing a casual tone that felt rehearsed. She asked who was feeding me lies, as if the existence of information was a true offense. She said she had not spoken to Ryan in years, that bringing up an old ex was childish, that it was unhealthy to dwell on ghosts from the past. Her words came smoothly, but the timing had already betrayed her. I did not argue with her explanation. I did not mention the patio bar, the cocktails, the angle of her knee. I did not pull out my phone and show her the photo. I did not raise my voice or list a pattern of changes I had been cataloging for weeks. I simply watched her. I watched the way her fingers wrapped around her glass a little tighter than before. I watched the slight flush creeping up her neck. I watched how carefully she controlled her breathing. In that moment, I realized I no longer needed confession. At work, when a route has been quietly altered, the numbers tell you long before anyone admits to the change. The reaction is what confirms it. Her reaction confirmed everything. Something between us ended right there at that island under the kitchen lights. It was not loud or explosive. It did not involve shattered plates or slammed doors. It was quieter than that, colder. It was a realization that the woman across from me was no longer operating within the same shared truth. And in her eyes, beneath the defensiveness and forced calm, I saw that she understood I had seen it. Instead of begging for reassurance or escalating the conversation into something loud and irreversible, I went silent in a way that was deliberate and controlled. I stopped initiating any physical contact, stopped reaching for her in the kitchen or in bed, stopped testing the space between us to see if it would close. I stopped questioning her schedule and stopped looking for explanations in her tone. If she wanted distance wrapped in politeness, I gave her something sharper, something more exact. I kept the house clean without being asked, vacuumed on Saturdays, wiped down the counters every night, handled the laundry with mechanical consistency. I maintained my workouts, left before sunrise, returned with sweat drying on my shirt and a steady rhythm in my breathing. I paid the bills on time, balanced the accounts, responded to emails from the insurance company and utility provider. If she wanted quiet, I gave her precision silence. Within days, she began testing the change. She commented one evening that I seemed calmer lately, her voice carrying a note of curiosity, as if she were observing a new version of me. She suggested we plan something fun for the weekend. Maybe try that new restaurant downtown, or take a short drive out of city. A few nights later, she brushed her hand lightly against my arm in the hallway and made a comment about how disciplined I had been with my workouts, a small flicker of flirtation that would have pulled me in a month earlier. I did not respond emotionally. I did not lean into the touch or pull away from it. I acknowledged her words with a neutral nod and returned to whatever task was in front of me. Inside, I had already shifted into execution mode. At work, when a route fails, I do not argue with the map. I reroute the shipment and move forward. I applied that same logic at home. I pulled my important documents from the closet one evening while she was at the gym, placing my passport, birth certificate, and financial records into a slim folder that I slid into my briefcase. I logged into our banking portal and separated what I legally could without alerting unnecessary alarms. Transferring my direct deposit into a new checking account, I opened in my name only at a different bank across town. The account opening took 20 minutes during my lunch break, a clean process handled by a polite teller who did not know she was witnessing the quiet dismantling of a marriage. I froze our joint credit cards under the explanation of fraud monitoring, a temporary measure that bought me time without triggering immediate confrontation. I ran a credit report to ensure there were no surprises hidden in accounts I had not tracked. I cataloged monthly expenses and created a projected budget based solely on my income. There was no anger driving these actions, only clarity. I found a furnished month-to-month rental near my office, a small but modern apartment with neutral walls and a short commute that would eliminate excuses. I toured it alone on a Thursday afternoon, ran my hand across the kitchen counter, checked the water pressure in the shower, and signed the agreement the next morning. I contacted an attorney recommended by a colleague who had gone through a clean but firm separation the previous year. We met in a quiet office downtown where I outlined the situation without embellishment. He nodded, took notes, and began drafting separation paperwork with the same detached efficiency I appreciated. There was no drama in any of it, no slam doors or midnight confrontations, just logistics, structured and deliberate, the way I handle any system that is proven unreliable. By the time Lauren realized the calm in the house was not reconciliation, but preparation, most of the heavy lifting had already been done. When I walked into the apartment one evening, carrying a single duffel bag in one hand and a small fireproof envelope tucked under my arm, the shift that had been quietly building for weeks finally surfaced in a way she could not ignore. The house was dim except for the kitchen lights, and she was sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone, still in her work clothes. She looked up casually at first, expecting an ordinary evening, but her eyes locked on the bag and then moved to the envelope, and something in her expression tightened. She asked where I was going, her tone light, but edged with sudden alertness. I set the duffel bag down by the hallway bench and placed the envelope on the counter with the same steady motion I use when laying out documents before a meeting. I told her the divorce papers would be ready by Friday. I did not dramatize the sentence or pause for effect. I delivered it cleanly like a status update. She laughed immediately, a quick, incredulous sound that carried more disbelief than humor. She said I was bluffing, that this was some kind of attempt to scare her or prove a point. She stood up and crossed her arms, leaning against the back of the couch as if waiting for me to break and admit I was being emotional. When I did not retract the statement, when I did not raise my voice or escalate, the laughter faded from her face. Her eyes searched mine for signs of anger or instability and found none. As realization began to settle in, she accused me of overreacting, said I was turning a misunderstanding into a catastrophe. She said marriages require work, and that I was running away instead of fighting for us. Her words came faster now, less measured, the calm confidence she had worn for weeks starting to fray. I listened without interrupting, without defending myself. I told her I was not running away. I told her I was simply done reacting. I explained that I had given notice on the lease, and that she could assume it if she wanted, that the landlord had already been informed of the change. I said it in the same tone I used when explaining a revised shipping schedule, factual and final. I added that she would not need to hide Ryan anymore, that there would be no more hallway phone calls or vague client dinners to manage. The name landed between us with weight. For a split second, she looked like she might deny it again, but the confidence she had leaned on all month cracked instead. Her posture shifted, shoulders losing their rigidity. It was not the look of someone heartbroken by the loss of a partner. It was the look of someone who had underestimated the timeline. She had expected more confrontation, more pleading, more negotiation. She had expected to control the pace of whatever this was, to decide when and how truths would surface. I picked up the duffel bag and told her I would be staying elsewhere. I did not slam the door or issue ultimatums. I simply outlined the next steps: separation paperwork, division of accounts, a formal process handled through attorneys. The room felt smaller as her composure thinned, as the reality of paperwork and finality replaced the abstract safety of secret meetings and polite denials. In that moment, what shifted in her expression was not sudden love or regret. It was a realization that control was slipping from her hands. The narrative she had been managing quietly had moved out of her grasp, and there was nothing dramatic left to manipulate. There were only logistics, signatures, and a man who had already stepped out of the emotional arena. The next few days unfolded exactly the way I expected once control began to slip from her hands, her tone cycling so quickly it almost felt rehearsed, as if she were testing different strategies to see which one would pull me back into emotional engagement. One evening she was furious, pacing across the living room accusing me of being cold and calculated, saying I had been waiting for an excuse to leave, reframing everything into a narrative where I was the aggressor and she was blindsided. The next morning she was soft, almost wistful, sending me photos from old vacations we had taken together. Pictures of us on a beach in Florida with wind-blown hair and sunburned shoulders, snapshots from a cabin trip in Michigan where we had laughed over burnt pancakes. She captioned them with short messages about memories and history, about how much we had built. She offered to cook my favorite chili one night, the same recipe she used to make during football season, say we should sit down and really talk without lawyers or paperwork between us. When that did not draw a response beyond a neutral acknowledgement, she shifted again and suggested therapy, but only under conditions that required me to admit I had overreacted and apologize for escalating things prematurely. The offer was framed as reconciliation, but it carried an underlying demand that I take responsibility for the fracture. She repeated that I was destroying our marriage over a single picture, reducing the past month of quiet withdrawal and deception into a single frozen image she could dismiss as misinterpreted. I responded only about logistics. I confirmed a meeting time with the lawyer. I forwarded the lease transfer details and the timeline for utilities to be placed solely in her name. I outlined a preliminary dog visitation schedule, so neither of us would use the animal as leverage. My messages were short, factual, stripped of commentary. I did not engage the emotional swings. I did not defend myself against the accusations or lean into the nostalgia. I treated the situation the way I would treat a warehouse closure, unpleasant but necessary, managed through process rather than impulse. Midweek, my phone rang from an unknown number while I was reviewing inventory reports. I answered out of habit and immediately recognized Ryan's voice on the other end, confident and slightly condescending. He told me to act like a man and talk to my wife instead of hiding behind paperwork. His tone implied that he saw himself as a reasonable party, the one encouraging communication. I did not respond. I let him finish his brief performance, then ended the call and blocked the number without a word. There was no benefit in engaging with someone who had already stepped into a space that was no longer mine by Friday morning. We sat side by side in a lawyer's office downtown, the air faintly scented with coffee and printer toner. The room was quiet except for the soft shuffle of paper as the attorney reviewed each section of the separation documents. Lauren's posture was composed again, chin lifted, expression neutral, as she initialed each page. She signed quickly through financial disclosures, the asset division outline, the temporary living arrangements. Her pen moved with steady strokes until she reached a clause regarding marital misconduct, language that documented infidelity as a contributing factor to the separation. Her hand paused for the first time. The pen hovered just above the paper. Her jaw tightened slightly, the same micro-expression I had seen at the kitchen island when I first said Ryan's name. For a moment, the room felt suspended. The attorney remained silent, eyes lowered respectfully. I did not look at her directly. I watched the reflection of her hand in the polished surface of the desk. After a few seconds that stretched longer than they should have, she lowered the pen and signed anyway. The ink settled into the paper with finality that required no argument, no raised voices, no dramatic exit. It was simply done, documented, filed. The rest of the pages were completed without hesitation. When we stood to leave, there was no embrace, no apology, no last-minute appeal. There were only signatures and the quiet acknowledgement that the process had moved beyond emotion into execution, exactly where I had positioned it from the start. After the papers were filed and the legal machinery began its steady, irreversible turn, her reaction shifted in a way that was almost clinical to observe. The calls that had once come in bursts of urgency slowed to occasional check-ins. The messages that had carried sharp edges softened into carefully worded paragraphs about reflection and growth. She sent one final long message late one evening, a structured attempt at reconciliation wrapped in language about second chances, about how crisis can reveal what truly matters, about how both of us had contributed to distance and could therefore both choose to rebuild. The tone was measured and thoughtful, crafted to sound mature and self-aware. I read it once without reacting and then put my phone face down on the counter. I did not answer. There was nothing left to negotiate because the negotiation phase had ended the moment I stepped into execution mode. The apartment near my office settled into routine quickly. Mornings were quiet and efficient. Coffee brewed in a smaller kitchen. Shoes lined neatly by the door. No tension hanging in the air. Evenings were calm. No hallway whispers. No coded language. No half-truths disguised as normalcy. The silence was not heavy. It was clean. Weeks later, I saw her by accident. I was driving north on High Street. Late afternoon traffic slow and compressed by a red light ahead. As I rolled to stop, I glanced to my right and recognized her car immediately. She was in the passenger seat. Ryan was behind the wheel. Sunlight cut across the windshield, illuminating both of them in profile. She was smiling at something he had said, but the smile did not carry the depth I remember from years earlier. It looked practiced, slightly exaggerated, as if she needed the world to believe that this was a correct outcome, that she had made an empowered choice rather than reacted to one. For a brief second our eyes met across the intersection. There was no visible shock, no dramatic reaction, just a flicker of recognition. The light changed to green, and traffic began to move. I felt nothing, no surge of anger, no wave of grief, no tightening in my chest. The image registered as information, and then passed. I pressed the accelerator and drove on, merging back into the rhythm of the road. In the weeks that followed, I reflected less on her and more on what had shifted inside me. I learned something simple and precise. When someone treats your presence like background noise, something expected and easily ignored, the most powerful move is not to raise your volume. It is to remove the sound entirely. There is no dramatic crescendo in silence. There is only absence, and absence forces clarity. She told me once during those final days, almost with a hint of admiration mixed with frustration, that I was finally learning. She meant that I was learning how to detach, how to stop reacting emotionally in ways she could predict and manage. She was right, though not in the way she intended. I learned that peace is not something you negotiate across a kitchen island under bright lights. It is not something you beg for or barter for with nostalgia and promises. Peace is something you protect with boundaries and action. It is something you secure through logistics when words fail. And once protected, it does not require validation from anyone sitting at a red light beside you.